Greetings, partners in the struggle. I'm thrilled and I'm honored to be here on this afternoon and to have the opportunity to share a few words. You should know that my role and my task as the moderator is not to be the focus of the conversation, but simply to facilitate the conversation among our distinguished panelists on today. Our conversation today will be centered on building sustainable wealth through our religious institutions. I would first like to ask each one of our panelists to tell us a little about themselves and the work in which their faith communities are engaged in an earnest attempt to build sustainable wealth in our communities. I would ask that they would introduce themselves and that they would take maybe 10 minutes or so to talk about their work. Let's welcome them with a round of applause.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Reverend Malcolm. My name is Imran Zaidi. Right now I'm representing Islamic Center of Long Island. It's in Westbury. I'm a member of this Islamic Society for about over 12 years. This is my first opportunity ever to actually speak on behalf of ICLI. I work as a product manager for a software development company. Here it is important to understand the value to have all vulnerable communities to be recognized and given a place as a table. For the longest time, Muslim community was not acknowledged as an important stakeholder in the world of business, so appreciate the efforts and the intellect of this conference. It is important to understand the world of business capital goes well beyond money and investment. Muslim community has some religious constraints that are very important for all stakeholders to understand. Interest-free loans. Difficult to understand, but various banks offer these options these days. Islamic financial institutions are designed or distinguished by keeping away from lending or borrowing on interest. An Islamic institution accepts investment deposits on a profit-sharing basis. As an example, if you are planning to invest in a house, what a lending firm would do, it will actually work with you and become a stakeholder or shareholder in that investment. They will buy the property. In case of profit, if you're planning to sell the property, they will share the profit that you would have made. In case if the property devalues and you are in a situation where you need to sell, whatever value you would have sold it for, any depreciation would be shared between yourself and the stakeholder. So this pretty much guarantees that you will stay away from foreclosures or in a situation where you wouldn't be able to live in your own house. Islamic principle requires that investors share in profit and loss. They receive no interest on their investments or loans. Similarly, if you were to invest or you were to put your money in a bank or in any institution, you will not be receiving any interest. And there are multiple reasons behind that. Therefore, by investing in a company, it is necessary to evaluate its business activities and financial records to determine where its primary revenue comes from. It should not be exposed to non-Islamic way of generating money, as an example, from gambling, pornography, or anything that is non-Islamic, that's considered non-Islamic. Investing according to Islamic principles can offer many benefits to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Islamic investing encourages a disciplined investment process that promotes in-depth security, research, and monitoring. Generally, the low debt requirements of Islamic screens facilitates a conservative approach that appeals to risk-averse investors. Islamic investing discourages short-term speculation. The low turnover required in investment portfolios require in longer planned holding periods and close scrutiny of the companies, or the financial companies rather. Low turnover also minimizes portfolio trading expenses such as broker commission, while increasing the tax efficiency by avoiding rapid buying and selling of securities that can generate taxable capital gains. There are very well-known financial firms that deal directly with local banks to secure home loans or investments for its clients in a very Islamic-approved lending. As an example, Guidance Capital's Amana Mutual Fund, etc. I can actually invite those guys further if you are more interested in learning about how the Islamic lending works. They can actually come and they can explain further. This was very much very high-level understanding of Islamic lending.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like for you to talk more about that later towards the end of our presentation. And now, Chaplain Chavez.
Good afternoon to all, and I know you guys are probably sleepy after that lunch, right? Well, I am the chaplain. I am the chaplain over at Belmont Racetrack, but not only there, I'm also the chaplain at Aqueduct in Saratoga. That means that I am the chaplain for all New York racing. And in June 10th, I hope to see you all at the Belmont Stakes, which is coming in soon. If you haven't purchased your tickets, by all means do so. And ladies, bring your hats. I want to see you all there. And then you would say, what is a chaplain doing in this gambling source of horse racing? But there is probably, give and take, a good estimate guess. People working at Belmont, it's about 2,500. And about 1,500 who actually live there year around. You might not see us during the off-season, but there is horse training during the off-season year around. New York racing is the largest horse racing industry in the whole nation and the only one in the nation that never shuts down. So if we're not running during the spring here, we're up in Saratoga, and if we're not in Saratoga, we're at Aqueduct. So we're a industry that never shuts down, and we always like for you guys to think about us for your next event, hosting an event. There's beautiful rooms there for you to bring your real estate agents or your agencies to enjoy a great day of horse racing and doing your businesses as well. If you need more information, you can see me afterwards on that, and I'll contact you to the right individual within the horse racing industry that you want to speak to. I'm also the pastor of a church in Malvern, New York, not too far from here. I'm the associate pastor at that church, and I also run the Hispanic side of that church as well. I'm also a member of the Elmont Chamber of Commerce. All my commerce people say, hey, all right. I'm also the member of the Hispanic, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Long Island as well. So you would say, why is a chaplain and a reverend involved in horse racing and in a local chamber? Well, if we're not involved, who else is going to be involved and bring in to our congregants the information that you probably have? So by all means, if we're a good resource to our congregants, we're doing our job, I always say. And to the masses that I speak to within the government level, the local level, our industry level, I am blessed to be able just to be here and share with you the little bit of knowledge that I have and grab from you the vast knowledge that you probably might have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce myself, which is perhaps what I should have done first. My name is Malcolm Byrd. I'm the senior pastor of Jackson Memorial A.M.E. Zion Church in Hempstead, 60 Peninsula Boulevard. Jackson Memorial holds the distinction of being the oldest black institution in Nassau County, founded in 1825. And in the spirit of the black church, the context from which I come, we have endeavored to do in Jackson Memorial what has been an important hallmark of the black church since the formal inception and development of the black church in America, beginning as early as 1774. And that is the intentional support of black and minority-owned businesses. When I was sent to Hempstead, I'm a part of the AME Zion Church, and we are an itinerant church insofar as the ministry is concerned. And so we are appointed by the bishop. And so after spending 6 years pastoring in San Francisco, the bishop sent me to Hempstead. And the first thing I thought about when I came to town was, I want to meet all the black business owners. So, not knowing much about the town or the region, I figured, well, I'm sure I'll find black businesses on a main street. I don't know much about the area, but I figured you gotta find some black businesses on a main street. So I put on some sneakers, and I found Main Street in Hempstead, and I went looking for black businesses. And I'm still looking for black businesses on Main Street in Hempstead. So I came back to the trustees in the congregation, and the Honorable Mayor Garner is a member of the trustee board, and I said, listen, I've been walking around town looking for black businesses. How do we know who to support in this church? How do we know what vendors to seek? And it was from that conversation that Jack's Memorial developed a black-owned business directory for Long Island, which means in our congregation, if there's ever a need, if we have to replace a light bulb and can't reach it, we will go through no less than 2 black-owned businesses to find someone to replace that light bulb that nobody else can reach. And it has become a process in which the entire congregation has bought into. We brought in Mark Morial, the chair of the National Urban League, to come in last year to speak to our congregation. Newsday and the Huffington Post picked it up about the importance of supporting black-owned businesses. And when I said to the members of the church, after we gave out this black-owned business directory, it took us about a year or so to work on it, to comb through it, and to be sure that what we were presenting with our church's name on it would be something that we as a congregation could stand behind. And I said to the parishioners, I said, for a period of 6 weeks, I want us to do all we can to support exclusively black-owned businesses. In some areas we were able to do that. In some areas we were not. But I said, but I want you to get all of the receipts you can from that 6-week experiment. And I would like for you to tally up that amount to show the buying power of one congregation in one village in New York intentionally devoted to supporting black-owned businesses. That one congregation of less than 200 people over a course of 6 weeks spent nearly $200,000 in black-owned businesses. We also have a credit union, which is such an important part of the African American experience. Why do black churches have credit unions? There was a time in which banks wouldn't lend to us, and in some cases still are not. You go back to the founding of what Alonzo Herndon was doing in Atlanta with insurance around the turn of the last century. What Abraham Lincoln was doing in Florida. His granddaughter became president of Spelman College and Bennett College, Dr. Janetta Cole. We as a black community have always supported black businesses through a collective. That is an African principle that made its way through the slave trade, made its way to the Americas, made its way to the black church, and it was through the central nature of the black church in America that gave black business owners really their initial foundation before there were such thing as business cards. You knew that if you were a member, if you were a business owner, and if you were a member of so-and-so church, you were guaranteed business by virtue of the pew you occupied on Sunday. You don't believe me? People join churches today with no interest in God. Yeah. Come join Jackson. You'll find out. Really. Some places, some congregations are the place to be. Culturally, there is a reason for that. We had to be responsible for marketing our own businesses. Where in the context of a black church, historically, if you're looking to buy a house, you could be seated on a pew with someone who was a realtor, with someone who was a banker, and someone who has a business that goes around doing home inspections, all on the same pew. But unfortunately, I think that in many instances, I'm not supposed to be talking. In many instances, forgive me. In many instances, I think many of us who own black businesses have failed to see the connective nature that can happen if that black pastor knows that you're doing what you're doing. How are we supposed to know what you have to offer? How are we supposed to know what services you have to offer if no one comes to us? And just because you went to one and didn't work out, that one doesn't speak for the rest of us. There are community faith leaders in our community who are very interested in supporting black and minority-owned businesses. But how are we to know? Unless you let us know what you have to offer. The black church is still the one place in the black community where one person's endorsement can buy you 90% of the support of the church. All a pastor has to do is stand up and say, let's support what this sister has going on, will you? And that sister will be bombarded after service. So while we're talking about marketability, I think Ms. Brazeley talked about it a few moments ago, about being able to market yourself. I would suggest that every business who's in here today, prepare a folder for every religious leader in your community. All you got to do. There are organizations that are developing among faith and clergy leaders in this community.
Yes.
I'm a founding member of the 100 Coalition and other organizations.
Yes.
If we knew what you had to offer, we could help you and we could support one another, which is in the spirit of the black community. That's who we are. We support one another. But you can't beat us up for not supporting you if we don't know. I know I'll support you. Come to Jackson. You got to stay the whole service, but come to Jackson. I'll be the first one up there. All right. Lending firms and the collective nature in which Islamic religious communities approach buying power. Because I heard you talk about that a moment ago, and that was just an incredibly powerful statement. If you could talk more about that, please.
Apologies, I'm not actually very well prepared for that. But what I can tell you that the Islamic lending firms, there are multiples already out there. Like as an example, I mentioned earlier, Amana Mutual Fund, and as well as the Guidance Capital. At ICLI, we do hold very regularly seminars where we invite different financial companies, not only Islamic as well as the non-Islamic financial companies, just so that people can actually do a very fair comparison between how these Islamic lending works versus non-Islamic lending works. That being said, all these banks that exist out there, Citibank, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, all the Islamic firms, they work directly with them and make sure they secure the Islamic way of lending money. Sure. And they only involve in the firms that are not involved in like tobacco sales or alcoholic beverage sales or anything that's considered ethically wrong. Similar to like how we would not recommend our kids to be involved in alcoholic beverages or pornography or tobacco. Similarly, within the Islamic community or the Muslim community, all members are considered like kids. So they are very strictly sort of told not basically to stay away from these. And these financial firms, they practice these laws very strictly, very closely, and they do lend money. And then like as an example I had mentioned earlier, like let's say if you were to buy a house, if I was to go out and buy a house directly from JP Morgan, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, let's take a few years back, like back in 2009, what happened, there was a financial meltdown.
Oh, yes.
Millions and billions of people, they lost their houses.
Yes.
99% of the people who had loans through these Islamic financial firms, they still hold their houses. None of them actually lost their houses. Only because there is a very fair way of dealing with finances. If, like I said, if the value is decreasing, not only you losing money, the investor is losing money. So the investor is not going to be after you to give the stake that the investor had lost. So that actually helps a lot of people. Let's say if any hardship comes up, they would not be in that scenario. Similarly, there wouldn't be any fraudulent lending either. Similar to how it happened in 2008, 2009, they were like people, they were making only 25K and they were buying 500,000K houses.
Right.
It's just not right. It's not possible. Here, it's actually every document is very strictly scrutinized before you actually receive funds. That being said, the work also rent to own. They actually give you the option to actually make your payments as a loan towards your make your rent as a loan towards the principal amount that you have. Let's say if you were to borrow $200,000 and your monthly payment is about $1,000 in rent, that would be adjusted towards your loan. But of course, there would be some. These financial firms are out there to make money as well. So let's say if a house worth $150K, they'll buy it from you and they'll sell it back to you for $200K. That $50,000 is what they would make after 30 years or 20 years, whatever time it would be, as opposed to if you were to buy a house on like a normal, regular lending process of $300K house after 30 years would actually cost you about double the amount, maybe about $600K. So here the profit margin is very minimal in favor of the people who are actually borrowing the money from these lending firms.
Interesting. Very interesting. I had no idea, but I know now, and I want to talk more about that when this is over. Chaplain Chavez, if you could talk a few moments about what does the support of minority-owned businesses look like from the perspective of your faith community? Is there a push from the congregation to support minority-owned businesses in your context? If so, why? If not, why?
Well, there's kind of 50-50 to that. Inner house businesses, want to go out into the world and conquer the world.
Yes.
Like any other business.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, supporting the aspect from the inside out, it's something that we push. It's something that we practice. But we all know that it's a balance. It's a 50% from the outside upon what you're doing as a business owner, and then there's that other percentage that comes in from the actual congregation that goes out there and supports. Mind you, nowadays with businesses online and all of that, it becomes, I think, harder to that individual who's paying that rent than that one who's not and making his or her money out of the internet. So it goes both ways, and I would say it would be a 50-50.
I would like to talk just a minute or two about what sustainability looks like from the perspective of religious institutions supporting black and minority-owned businesses. In the 1960s, I want to couch this in a historical conceptual framework. There were millions of dollars in grants that were given to black churches in Detroit, in New York, in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C., all of our major urban centers to build housing developments. So millions of dollars were funneled into black churches, not for home buying initiatives, but were funneled in for the sake of building apartments that were getting our people out of another type of depressed housing situation and putting them in fair and affordable housing. In many instances, had a church's name on it. The church never owned that building. And many of those cases, there was a long-term lease on many of those apartment buildings that after 40 or 50 years or so, ownership would revert back to the sponsoring institution, that sponsoring congregation. In my research prior to coming in here, and I probably studied perhaps about 26 or 27 of those studies regarding those historic African American congregations who built housing, about 9% of those now are still owned, or ownership has reverted back to those congregations, which means the funds came in to build housing in our community, but it's really not sustainable for our community because after all of these years, we still don't own the property. You go throughout Harlem, many of those buildings that were built by those historic Harlem institutions. Go to Brooklyn. And what you find is, in many instances, the black church is suffering from amnesia now. Because the conversation now among my clergy colleagues, and you all have them as well, be in Brooklyn and all over, conversation on gentrification. It's happening right here in Nassau County, too. Gentrification. Our community no longer looks like our people. Well, when the churches had the chance to buy the whole block, we opted not to do it. Well, I appreciate the amen. Thank you. So what does sustainability look like now? Where I have a friend of mine who pastors in Harlem right now, and I said to him, well, why aren't you not pushing home ownership in your congregation? He said, well, here's the thing, Malcolm, my people don't make enough money to be able to get a loan to buy $1 million property in Harlem or Brooklyn. So what does that mean? Even if the church now cannot afford to buy back their own building in their own neighborhood, how now can the conversation happen between two vulnerable institutions, the black church and the black-owned business? What are ways in which we can partner to support each other's lives together rather than losing our lives separately? What are ways in which we can do that? And with that being the case, I'll cut off now unless we have any more comments, and we'll take some questions from the floor. Any questions from the floor? Yes, my sister. Are we using this microphone here? Good question. Check and see if that microphone works.
Just 1, 2.
Right on. It works.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing such valuable information. My question is, do your congregation, do you ever go out into the community and have kind of like speaking engagements or this specific topic of discussion with other pastors and clergy leaders?
I mean, me personally?
Yes, sir.
I have in the context of my own denomination, but not insofar as other groups of clergy. No, I'm a part of a number of clergy groups who are of the same mind as I. So the circles in which I float in, we pretty much have of the same mind. But no, I've never had the opportunity to go into a congregation separately. No.
Is that a conversation you would be interested in having and exploring?
It all depends on who's asking. I'll do it for my people, but I'm not sure if I'll do it for others.
Okay, I'll connect afterwards. Thank you.
Maybe. Because no one does it for us.
Thank you.
No.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you all very much for the information. I had a question for the gentleman right here. That's quite fascinating, what you're able to do and how you're able to educate your community and also be a source of income and be a source of financial support. Is this something that you've talked about within your religious community, educating other people within Westbury? I happen to know that you're on Brush Hollow Road. I've passed it a couple of times. Is this something that you, a template that you are talking about putting together to educate other religious institutions in Westbury or Nassau County, or something that you're thinking about now that I mentioned it?
Thank you very much. That is actually a very wonderful question. Like I said in the opening statement, this is our first opportunity ever to actually discuss any of the financial matters or like how the lending works in Islamic way. I'll take it back to the community at ICLI, and we do have a very regular interfaith sessions with different congregations all the time. So this can be actually another important topic which can be added and which can also be shared among other communities as well. But within our own community, we do have our Sunday sessions where community is invited on different topics, and there have been multiple sessions where we have done financial, be it like investing or lending or anything of that sort.
That's why we're here.
Absolutely.
This is the purpose of this panel, to
Indeed.
make sure that we learn from this and we can come to you and say, this is a template that we can educate other,
Absolutely.
religious institutions.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Are there any more? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I would just like to say, I just want to let you know that I came from the AME Zion Church.
Where?
Mother's AME Zion.
In Harlem?
In Harlem.
I was ordained there.
And I was christened there.
Yes, I know the church very well.
And not only was I christened there, but Reverend Robertson signed my christening paper.
Benjamin Conklin Roberson, absolutely.
Paul Roberson's brother.
That's right. Yes.
So I do go back a little ways.
Yes. And you live out here now?
Yeah, I've been out. I was born here.
Where do you live? What city?
I live in Mount Sinai now, but I used to live in St. Albans.
Well, that's not far from Hempstead. Come on and join Jackson.
I just want to say this to you also. The other side of my family was Congregationalists.
Okay.
And my great-grandfather's people founded the Congregational Church in Atlanta, Georgia, on Auburn Avenue.
First Congregational.
The first Congregational
Andrew Young
Church.
was minister there. I know the church very
He
well.
oversaw my great-aunt's funeral.
I know it.
Who
I know
died
the
as the oldest living citizen of
My,
Atlanta.
my.
They graduated from Atlanta University.
Yes. Okay, you're giving us all your stuff now. Okay.
With a class of 13
My.
when she graduated from
But
Atlanta
you just brought up a
University.
very historical point. I talked about Alonzo Herndon a moment ago, who was one of America's first black millionaires. The building of that first Congregational church in Atlanta was due in part to his philanthropy to that church.
So was it for my great-grandfather, whose name was Wesley Redding.
You know all the people, all the people.
Wesley Redding, they used to call him Colonel,
Mm-hmm.
and he used to walk up and down Auburn Street in his Phillips, what is that called, Prince Phillips jacket,
yes,
what
right.
have you.
Yes, I have
And
one.
he owned a hotel there, and he owned an insurance company, and he worked for a bank there for coloreds and Indians. That's how he started before he became an entrepreneur in Atlanta. But the one thing I want to tell you, would remind people about, is that we got away from entrepreneurship, and my great-grandfather was an entrepreneur, so was my father, and so was his father. His father did a little bootlegging down in Virginia, but he became a professional engineer. But I have to say this. I remember when I was a little girl, and my grandmother was listening to the radio, and and she used to listen to Reverend Ike.
Yes.
And Reverend Ike used to preach about entrepreneurship and making money. And I think we've gotten away from the part that it's, we say, oh, the love of money is the root of all evil, but not having money. And we forgot that we can have money without being evil. And as long as we don't have the love of money. And we forgot how to make money, because that was the only way we survived, if we could make money. And we were all entrepreneurs because nobody would hire us. Just like they talk about subcontracting. When my father started out in the engineering business, he did nothing but prime contracting because there wasn't an affirmative action program and nobody would hire him. Except for he worked for other engineers of color. That's who he worked for. Architects of color. That's who he worked for. So we started out taking care of ourselves and doing what we needed to do. My father also worked for the Department of Housing, so in the 60s, when that money came down, I believe it was from Richard Nixon,
Yes.
he did a lot of housing. We did a lot of housing up in Harlem, including the St. Philip's houses.
Yes.
So, and St. Andrews housing. So I know of the housing that you're talking about because we worked on those houses. We did the electrical and mechanical engineering design on those houses that were owned by the churches. We have forgotten where we came from in order to come back to where we are now. We don't know our history. We every time I turn around, it was very upsetting to me when people think that we just discovered entrepreneurship. But we've been doing this for many, many years.
Yes.
And we need to know where we've come from so we know where we're going.
With someone, thank you. With someone on the panel, would you like to address that statement regarding the need for pushing entrepreneurship? Anyone want to address that?
I guess it goes hand in hand. Just two things before we close, because I know we got to close.
Oh, yes.
One, I'm also part of the Long Island Hispanic Pastoral Association. And we are always looking for individuals and business so that our folks, one of the largest growing populations, which are Latinos here in Long Island, are always looking to start a relationship, whether it's a governmental agency or a business entrepreneur agency, so that we could funnel that to our congregants.
Sure.
So it is important for you to, as well as us, to come out of the woods and say, here I am. Let's meet, let's chat, let's get to know each other so that you could be a resource to us, the clergy, so that we could funnel it out to our congregants. That's one. Number two, and I'll finish with that. June 10th, Belmont Stakes. Make sure you go.
I'm sorry, there's...
Hi.
Yes,
I
yes,
got the
ma'am.
mic. Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Annette Runcie. I'm the owner of Panache Restaurant and Lounge. My husband and I own Panache Restaurant and Lounge and also a franchise. I'm also the chairperson of our first merchant association for Rosedale, Laurelton, and Springfield Garden, which I'm very excited about us moving forward. I want to first applaud you for bringing up this topic because it was just like last week. I was discussing the need for clergy to really participate in this Black Wealth 2020 movement that we're looking to do. And it's very, very important because I know from like the business standpoint, I represent the business from Marls. And given the input that I've received from the committee, a lot of business folks do not feel supported by the church. I mean, we give a lot. I mean, a lot of times when the church approach us, it's about like, what can you give? What can you give us?
Yeah.
What can you give us? And we feel like we've given, like I've given, but we don't necessarily see that any kind of support in return. And so we want to be able to sit at the table and to kind of have the discussion about how do we make this a supportive environment, for the Black community.
I will say it very quickly in response to that. You own a restaurant, right?
Yes.
There is, in Jackson Memorial, we have a men's group and a women's group that meets on Saturday mornings at different times. And when I first came, we got this group started, and we were going to non-minority owned diners for our breakfast groups. And as soon as a new Black-owned soul food restaurant opened up on North Franklin Street in Hempstead, I went and talked to the owner, and I said, would you mind opening up a little bit earlier on Saturday so that we can have our breakfast groups to come over and to meet? Our congregation pumps about $800-900 a month into that restaurant just for fellowship breakfasts between our men and women's groups. I would suggest that for every congregation within a 1 mile radius of your business needs to have a packet about what you're willing to offer. Are you willing to open up on alternate days? And what would you be willing to offer those congregations should they come? I'm a witness. Pastors will be willing to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I have reached out to the churches in the community. In the community. This is Lisa. She's actually on the same block that I am in a restaurant. And we have reached out a lot to the churches in the community. And I applaud you again for doing such that. I mean, it's that kind of behavior that we encourage.
Yes.
You know, we have reached out. We've talked with the Civic Association about the importance of, you know, them supporting the black businesses in the community. And so we want those kind of behaviors. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you. I think no more questions. That's all we have. I know there are other questions. I will be around later on if any of you would like to ask questions of myself or any of the panelists. Can we thank our panelists today?